never heard of. Hey everybody, welcome to the Common Folk Podcast with Ben, Morgan, and Andy.
Welcome back to Common Folk.
There we go. The podcast for the people, by the people.
That's right. That's right.
You like that tagline, Kyle?
I do.
Pretty good.
Got a we're down one today. We're down a co-host.
We are. How's Morgan doing?
Sound pretty good. She's doing the rim to rim walk. I think we'll probably talk about that in a future episode.
Yeah, I want to hear about it.
And normally she's sitting right here next to me, so now I got someone not quite as attractive sitting next to me.
You'd buy that, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right on. I mean, it matter, but I guarantee you're right.
So who we got, Andy? What's up?
Kyle Lechtenberg, a guy that grew up in my neck of the woods back in Boyd County. It was kind of a fun rivalry between the three towns there, Lynch, Spencer, and Butte. And in a lot of cases, because back in our day, our numbers were dwindling then too, being rural Nebraska and all that, we would always consolidate for some sports, and baseball being one of them. And Kyle, I think I was on a team with you maybe once. You might have been a little younger.
Yeah, we were about every other year, I think. I just didn't play it enough, so you never knew I was on your team. No.
There were some stud athletes from Butte that were on some of our best baseball teams. So
you guys about the same age?
Yeah, you were one grade ahead of me, and so usually we were on the same baseball team every other year. Competed in other sports every year, though.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So, Andy, I'll let you run with this, but to start with my understanding of one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was some foreign ownership in farm ground in the U.S., and I guess in property in general, and a couple specific topics surrounding that. But before we got into that, I was hoping we could start by kind of going through some of the history with our guest, why he's here to talk about that. Like, what is it that he does and who he is? Right.
So the headline that kind of captured everybody and came out about a week ago, and I saw it in Fortune magazine, was Saudi Arabia is pumping water on 10,000 acres of drought-stricken Arizona ground, and the new governor, Hobbs, who won a real tight race, that's interesting too. The Democrat moved in to save the day, and first thing she does is save the day by stripping the Saudi Arabia company from their water rights. And then you go down the rabbit hole and read this article, and it's like, oh, wow. So Saudi Arabia just had this free reign to pump as much water as they wanted to on alfalfa fields that they would cut and farm year-round, which that's a big drawback for Nebraska and South Dakota, which used to be, some of the world's greatest alfalfa ground. Well, we're hamstrung by stupid winter. We got to stop producing hay in winter. Arizona now is better at it because they can do it year-round. So anyhow,
or can they?
Well, they
are.
They are.
We're finding out.
Yeah, we're finding out. So anyhow, this article comes out, and you really, I like your two perspectives on it. Was like, let's read it, let's try to consume it, and take a step back and break it down. Because on the surface, it's pretty loony to think that Saudi Arabians have come to America, bought farm ground, farm it year-round for alfalfa, ship it back to their dairy cattle in the middle of Saudi Arabia, and that's that. Like, that's a win-win-win-win for everybody.
It's wild.
So on the surface, that, it doesn't even... How did it get there? Is my question. So I brought in Kyle because Kyle owns and operates a farm up in Boyd County, and you guys do a lot of alfalfa, right?
Yes. Yeah. And actually, as you were talking there, I was thinking at one point in time, we were the second largest alfalfa grower in the state of Nebraska, and we were actively trying to buy the first. So the alfalfa component of this article, I could come at it from that angle. Fast forward to today, I'm actually a large ag estate planner. And so, and then my wife and I served on it 2 years on an American Farm Bureau committee where we helped facilitate conferences and went around more on the bureaucratic and political side of some of these issues. And so that's probably, I could take a stab at this from about three different angles. And so it's a lot. There's a lot of layers here, I would say.
There is a lot of layers. And that's a big reason why I want to get you on, not only for the I would have wanted you just for the alfalfa perspective anyway, right?
Sure.
Because it sounds to me like, well, this is kind of putting a dent in your livelihood as far as being a alfalfa guy from Nebraska, having people from overseas come in and make their own alfalfa and kind of cheating, right? They're just growing alfalfa year round, unregulated irrigation as well. Where I know my farm in Boyd County, which we don't have a lot of farm ground, but we got that alfalfa field along the highway.
Yep, I know where it is. Yep.
We're not allowed to irrigate. I can't put a pivot there.
Yep.
But Saudi Arabians can in Arizona on 10,000 acres?
Right.
Huh. And not be regulated? Oh.
It's strange.
Okay.
It's strange.
Yeah.
So Kyle, you touched a little bit on, a little bit of your background being in farming, growing alfalfa, touch on some of those things a little bit more along with what your current job is today so we can help folks understand like kind of where you're coming from.
Well, I want to start back about 2006 to 2008 when I was a typical farm kid from Nebraska. My parents actually both worked off the farm, but we had a small farm as well, just similar, very similar to Andy's upbringing. And I had a big passion to farm, and I went to a conference in St. Louis, Missouri with a company. They're now called Uncommon Farms. They probably haven't heard of them, but they're a small company over there. And a friend of mine took me and another guy to it, and they basically painted this picture that if you weren't growing your farm at a very large scale, it's going to be tough to stay in business, tough to stay in the mold of growing a farm. And I really bought into it big. I really realized because I came at farm, I didn't have anything really to move home to in terms of resources. So I was looking for that competitive advantage to get into farming. And through college, I worked for a commercial alfalfa operation not too far from here, actually right outside of Ashland. And that gentleman and I put together a farm transition to where I could move that business up to Boyd County and do commercial hay up there, commercial alfalfa. And
so
it was
your family. So at that time you were in college.
Yep.
When you were talking about this time frame.
Yep.
So prior to that, was your family growing alfalfa? Is that how you came up?
Not really.
Okay.
We might have had a field or two, but it was usually done by the neighbor or
Gotcha.
rented
Yep.
out.
Yep.
It wasn't. I'm number 5 of 8 on a quarter of ground with
Okay.
a teacher
Yep.
and a nurse.
Yeah.
So we, most of our upbringing was carrying buckets to pets.
Gotcha.
It
Yep.
didn't.
Yep.
It wasn't the farming you think
Yep.
of
Sure.
today, or
Yep.
even at that time. Really, it was more. As my dad would put it, it was ingrained in us to teach us how to work. It really
Absolutely.
wasn't an
Yeah.
economic thing from that
Yep.
perspective.
Yep. So yeah, just to get an idea of that. So then you went to school and then you started kind of seeing some of these things and got
I
involved.
worked for a hay farm, alfalfa
Yep.
farmer, and
Yep.
I remember, fast forward to what I'm doing today, financial planning. One of my first conversations with him was I wanted to build an agriculture accounting program. And so alfalfa financials, they've kind of always been part of my life. And so those are the things that I know about, I
Was
guess.
finance what you went to school for?
Ag economics.
Ag
Yep.
economics, okay.
Yep. So yeah, through that, took Dr. Hansen out of Lincoln. He's probably the best mentor I have. We've had him come up and speak with landlords and vendors through events with our farm at that time, and do different estate planning workshops and stuff. So some of that's really always been passionate. And I as I read this article, I thought about the larger theme here. There's so many baby boomers across the country that are going to be exiting the agriculture industry, and the bigger issue that I see with this article is that real estate is going to transition as well. And so I have a whole dialogue that we were just talking about ahead of the show. Some of my old committee members at the American Farm Bureau and some close friends that I talked to about coming on this show and talking about these larger themes of dynamics of wealth coming down the pipeline to companies that honestly aren't set up to operate at that scale. And so when you talk about 10,000 acres of alfalfa year round, I get PTSD personally. We were doing over 12,000 tons of alfalfa per year at my farm when now I'm passively farming. When I was active farming, and that was seasonal, as you know.
Right.
The wintertime, we spent a lot of time trucking and hiring trucks and dispatching trucking all over the country. We sent hay from just about to every state. And so when I think of the organization behind that many acres of alfalfa, and again, down there it's a lot easier to you don't have the rain issues you got controlled water on, water off, hopefully in this case. You got the state government mandates and stuff. So yeah, it's, I feel like this topic we could take days on. So I'll do my best to fit it into what you guys got for me.
You've already touched on a couple of things that I didn't even realize, and I'm sure we'll get into those. But one of these things that you were saying there towards the end that just kind of like turned a light bulb on for me. When I first read this, I was thinking to myself, these idiots of everywhere they could go in the United States went to Arizona, like one of the driest places around, and bought up land and leases and whatever, and decided they were going to grow hay. Like, what in the heck is wrong with them? But then what you just said right there, it kind of makes sense, because if they don't care about their impact, they don't live here, and they can turn water on and off, they don't have to worry about rain wrecking hay laying on the ground.
Yeah.
Whatever else goes along with it, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and when I started doing a little research for this, because when I go down a rabbit hole, I go, right? I'm like, oh, man, because I'll have questions in my head that I want the answers to. And I listened to a little interview with this guy on this subject, or it branches off of it. But I think it was like in the early 2000s, he had a color print ad from a farm journal that it just straight up said, water issues? None here. Move to Arizona. We had no water regulations whatsoever in Arizona. Pump all you want, however you want, for as much as you want. So, like, here's just an ad selling ag land in Arizona, and this is a nationwide farming journal, just straight up saying, if you have water issues in Nebraska, let's say Boyd County, forget about it. Move that operation to Arizona, and you won't have to worry about water regulations getting in the way. Then on top of that, you have a 24/7, 365 growing season.
Right.
And if you do the math in the article, excuse me, the land value is another competitive advantage. If you take, this was very quick math from the article, but I think it put per irrigated acre at about $4,700 an acre, roughly, just kind of broad 40,000 foot stroke. And so if you look at what local land values are, we're near Iowa here, up in Boyd County, they're a little lower, but those are pretty low land values. Nobody apparently wants to buy land there and farm it. And so there's a competitive advantage component that I think foreign entities are looking at. If we can kind of go out here in the middle of nowhere and help secure our own food supply, that's an attractive thing for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then just talking to Andy a little bit ahead of time, I look at this thing kind of, you have a political component to it. You have a bureaucratic component, which I want to differentiate that, because the bureaucratic piece is the federal, state, and local rules that you're very much subject to. Like you mentioned, you can't pump out of the Ponca Creek right there.
Yep.
Funny story. We had a 1956 L.J. Lechtenberg water right on the Ponca Creek. If they go dormant for 5 years, they're technically supposed to close off
forever.
Yeah, the registration leaves. Well, probably 10 years ago, a little more than that, they hadn't closed it. And I said, well, it's not closed now. I want to use that water right. And we actually got a Ponca Creek system in place from a 1956 water right. We were able to do that. And so that was a state rule.
That superseded Boyd. Superseded the county. You took me
the county would be the NRD.
Well, I think
I probably did.
I'm pretty
I
sure
show everybody that. It was the first
Yeah.
subsurface drip irrigation system in the area. And so not only were we able to get that right, but we were able to put in a system that was very efficient, known today as the most efficient for irrigation. But all that to say that we didn't have to deal with any federal entity. It was just the NRD, which is local governing, and then the state DNR. We also had to get kind of cleared past them, and they do manage the gallons per minute loosely. It's not very. You just have to submit a report like every 3 years or something like that. So I don't know the Arizona laws well enough to know, but I think you're seeing a situation where they have low land values, they have loose compliance, and you got a country that wanted to help secure their food supply. So as a capitalist person, I would need to know more to argue it, to be totally blunt. Yeah. Now, I know politically that isn't always the right thing to say because there's also political wins. You mentioned a Democratic governor. I don't know. Arizona always seems like one of those states that's kind of
back and forth.
It
really
is.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think the political dynamic. I know being part of the American Farm Bureau, which is very both, it's a very red and blue organization. It's out to help all of agriculture. And they would, very much want to look at the full issue before just broad stroking it one direction or the other.
Well, and a huge part of the component that we missed was all this water is available due to an aquifer underneath the state, much like the Ogallala Aquifer in Nebraska. And we have states down around the Gulf of Mexico to Texas to Kansas all trying to tell Nebraska how to manage our aquifer. And it's the same thing happening in Arizona that allows for all this pumping right now. And what's really ignited, in my mind, what's ignited a lot of this was, and this is a poor county too. It's all, what the heck's the name of this county? Pawnee or something. Anyway, it's a population of like 16,000 people, a lot of trailer parks and like retired folks that are just living on a little income, and they just have their own little private well that goes about 600 feet down. Those wells are running dry now. And you have these super farms from Saudi Arabia and other places that are drilling down 1,200, some of them 2,400 feet. So they don't care if a 600 foot, it's about procurement like we're talking about here and having watering our year-round crop. And our 1,200 foot well shouldn't run dry for another 9 years at least. I mean, that's the data we're getting back. So it also helps them to run dry these other wells because then they're not pumping out of it. So it's tough to be mad at this corporation when they're just doing what a corporation's supposed to do, right? If you look at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, and some of those depths, I didn't remember that from the article. That might have been some of your extra research, but those are very deep wells. Yeah. I mean, to think that there at some point probably should be some state regulation if obviously there's some mandates coming on board now, but maybe building some better policy around that to help protect the natural resources of our country.
Yeah, so La Paz County is what it's called. And one of the articles that I was reading goes all the way back to 1980. And that was the formation of this county. And the gal that was given this interview says, I think the whole reason this county was created in 1980 was for water rights, period. Because in 1982, a bunch of legislation got written into law where Arizona, Tucson, they all had water regulations. They could only use so much water per capita.
Like, was Las Vegas in that mix? I thought I read them too, that there was some
of this water that feeds it comes out of the Colorado River.
That's maybe what I saw.
But La Paz, all the fourth generation farmers and ranchers there put up a big stink about it and got it turned their way where they weren't regulated. So if they were using the water in a very gray area, beneficial use or something like that, like what's beneficial use, right? They could sell their water rights to a city, use it all on the farm, just run it down the drain if they want, but they could pump as much water as they wanted, but it was self-regulated. No regulation from state, county, or federal. So you virtually put in a green light to do whatever,
like
however.
The farmers made their bed. Sounds like
A little bit here, yeah.
And now the land's going out of their hands, and who's the buyer?
So you're talking about a symptom, right? I'll take you guys back a little further. We're just talking about 1980. So in 1973, when all the oil embargoes started happening, and they had that big war in the Middle East, and that's when United States just went in a tizzy because I think gas prices quadrupled in some areas of the nation. Well, what we did to counteract that, we put an embargo on wheat and our food. We stopped sending food to the Middle East, and the Middle East shot back and said, "Okay, we're not going to we're not going to send you oil, then, you dummies." Well, some folks in Saudi Arabia figured out, "Oh, we got an aquifer here," so they drilled down and set out just real aggressive subsidies to local farmers in Saudi Arabia to irrigate their own crops. And from 1973 up to about the early 2000s, late 1990s, Saudi Arabia was the 6th largest wheat exporter in the world. Russia, United States, Saudi Arabia, there for wheat.
Strange.
Well, they figured out it took them about 20 years to run that thing dry to where catastrophic. Like now the land's going to collapse. It's just crazy stuff like that. So now it's basically illegal to raise alfalfa in Saudi Arabia. And the government turned to 180, said, not only do you not have a subsidy to just, pump as much water as you want and grow whatever you want, however you want, it's illegal. Figure it out somewhere else. So now you're having companies like they're scrambling. And a lot of these farms are in Argentina and other places. And only about 3 to 5% are here in the United States. But the fact that, they're a half a world away, and Arizona's in the middle of a terrible drought, and they're saying there's no regulation, we're within the law. Pump it. We need more for our dairy farm here that we built in the early 70s on up to now. There's this one farm that is catching a lot of the flack, has 160,000 dairy cattle in Saudi Arabia, and they need to feed them. And they don't have all this farm ground that used to be limitless water to just a few years ago.
Could you imagine the cost associated with growing all that hay here and then moving it over there? I mean, how does that even...
Goes to a port in California, then shipped over to Saudi Arabia.
But how does that even pencil out?
Well, it's interesting because I think of my goal back kind of in my alfalfa prime. I always wanted to export alfalfa. To my knowledge, it never got done. If somebody beyond our sale got it overseas, good for them. But I never did get that done. But it goes back to if you've got $20,000 an acre ground locally here, and there's been sales to prove those plus.
Yeah.
And the ground down there is $4,000 an acre or $5,000 an acre, and it's the same productivity. There's a lot in logistics to get it trucked to a port and then get it. My understanding of shipping containers is they traditionally are extremely cheap. They're very. It's not. That's not even the expensive part of the export. It's finding the right brokers that are honest, that aren't going to gouge you, and make sure you get a consistent flow of products overseas. So it becomes more of a political, bureaucratic thing. So if you can, if you're producing hay on that kind of ground and you can get it to a port, it's competitive. I mean,
it's we're obviously, and you would know some of these numbers. So tell me maybe some of this what you think about. But we've always raised horses here out on this property that we're on right now. And we're down to just a couple. It's like a hobby deal now that my mom still kind of has going on. But when I was a kid, we were buying from down the road alfalfa bales, square bales, 70-ish pound bales, that we'd feed these horses, real clean, nice hay for $2 a bale, somewhere in that range, maybe $3.
It's like $90 a ton. Would that probably equal out to somewhere in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So today, just within like the last couple of months, we bring in 100 bales from about the same distance, and we're upwards of 12. So, we're looking at what's been less than 20 years, and that's how much we're dealing with. So if we were running the size of operation that we were running when we were paying $2 bale hay, and it was like 30 horses out here. Now we've got 2 and we're paying $12 hay. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we would make that work. It just wouldn't work. So then I think about that and I go, okay, if that hay's $12 a bale, which I know they're probably shipping big round bales and things like that, but either way, you do the math, and you're adding on top of that 12 continually, I just don't understand how they make it work.
Oh, there's a lot to that. We shipped a lot of hay to Texas, and I could never understand that either. Mm-hmm. I shipped hay right down the road from here. Ashland, Eagle, Nebraska was where the commercial hay I started with was, and I'm a ranch kid, came from northeast Nebraska, and I asked my boss at that time, Dan Hanna, I said, how can people afford this? I mean, we can't raise cattle with these kind of values. Mm-hmm. And he said land values. Their land is so expensive in Texas, they can't afford to grow hay on it. Mm-hmm. And I think that dynamic plays out in this Arizona farm, because I just go back to the land values. If you can produce irrigated products on $4,000 an acre ground mm-hmm. versus doing it here for $20,000 acre ground, there's too much in that difference to go through in one podcast, but I can tell you it's significant. And so they found a competitive edge, and it sounds like the governor shut it off for now. And I think there's going to be a lot more conversation around policy. And
the governor just shut off two leases, and that comes up in a few months. So they're still doing what they're doing. And on top of that, when you really get into it, it looks like they didn't even do anything wrong as far as the water, other than just not caring and being belligerent about it. Mm-hmm. And also, it's going across seas. Is there that element into it? We don't forget about that?
Politically, there's a huge... I haven't met one person that I've had this conversation with that is supportive of foreign ownership of our mm-hmm. land. Yeah. I will say, back in 2006, when I was kind of choosing my career path, there was a lot of your larger farms were looking at farmland. You mentioned Argentina. That mm-hmm. was a big push because they could grow 2 soybean crops in 1 year.
There you go.
And so you had, in hindsight, I think you had some really wealthy board farmers in America with a lot of money. Mm. And they said, let's fly to Argentina and see what this is about. And I think over a decade of that, it wasn't overly successful for us being foreign ownership in other mm-hmm. countries' land, but I think we learned a lot. We know more about their markets. We know that they don't have the distribution systems that we do. They've learned the hard way, essentially, on some of that. Yeah. And plus, you get into those other political environments, it's not as conducive for capitalistic economies, and so definitely in this situation with Saudi Arabia, I'm sure that some of these things and policy being built around them as an example they may have to pull back, even if it's purely all legal and they're doing everything right. It may not be in their best interest.
Right. Yeah. It's probably gonna take a change here. And that's one of the things that came up was get off your soapbox. United States owns a bunch of tomato farms in Mexico.
Right.
Canada owns a bunch of farmland mm-hmm. in the United States.
We are doing the same thing. And so that's the struggle I have with the farming community. It's just like you had given the example. The local farmers set local policies. Now they're having to live with them, and they don't like them. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes there is political reasons, there's bureaucratic reasons to develop new policy. I mean, I think that's the beauty of our system is we can go back and change the laws if we need to.
On that topic, I've got some numbers that I wanted to look at and talk to you guys as well, but to rewind just real quick and kind of bring a little closer to that, on the Arizona thing, have you guys seen or read any of the articles about like just their water shortages in general?
Mm-hmm. They're in a bad way right now with this drought.
Yeah.
They're in a real bad way.
And
it's all over. Anytime I've been down there, my wife's family's from the Phoenix area, her extended family, and every time we're down there, I always listen to the news. And in almost 2 decades, water is almost on the news, if not every day. It's close. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I think it's always a looming issue. They're always in a drought, right?
It's a desert,
right?
Yeah, you got to wonder. When we hear about the Saudi Arabia thing or anything else, how is that actually going on when they can't even they don't have enough water for their cities.
Right.
And that's probably a whole nother conversation as far as like what they've done with growth and building houses and their golf courses and all the things that come along this that they have to continue to water.
Yeah.
But I was listening to a story. It might have been a podcast or something. It might have been the New York Times. I've got an article up here from that, but they were talking about how they are looking into building these facilities down on the coast that are going to, like, what do they call the process? Like desalinate?
Yeah, it's in Israel does this.
Okay.
I don't recall the actual process, but basically, they have a way to take seawater and
filter
convert
out the salt.
Yep, and make it usable, consumable.
Yeah, and then they're gonna pipe that from the coast. So they were talking, and I wish I would have listened to this again before we did this because it's been a few months since I heard it. But they have gone down to whatever country it was, and they're trying to make deals.
Might be Turkey. I know of this process, but I can't remember all the specific players. It's Israel Technology, and then whatever. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So they're trying to make deals like, hey, we're going to use your land. We're going to build this huge facility. We're going to give you a bunch of jobs. There's going to be this huge pipe that's going to run right through the middle of your country and also go through a lot of other things. Like they're having to deal with some Native American tribes and trying to figure out how to get through this, what the path is going to be.
Yep.
But
don't go through Boyd County, right, Andy?
Oh, my God.
If you think about it, like what makes them think that they're so important that they're going to go down and step all over these people, do this, and then run their pipe right through everybody's shit. They don't care.
Yeah.
So that we can make sure Phoenix has water.
Yeah.
Because we've overbuilt the place. And we're going to continue to overbuild it because there's a lot of money to be made there.
Yeah.
We keep popping this stuff up and people keep coming.
Yeah.
So we need water.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went there because when I started kind of diving into this isn't a new story. Like you're talking about, Kyle. Like every time you're down there, they're talking about water shortages and a drought and this and that. And one of the more fascinating 15-minute little docu-series that I found from NBC News was 4 years old. And what they were talking about, the headline, draining Arizona, mining water. Like, wow, that's pretty scary. We're going to be out of water. They're just going to dry up down there, right? And these people from NBC, real good journalists, they were attacking United States farmers, and mainly this corporation called IFC. Do you know these guys? International Farming Corporation?
I don't.
They're based out of North Carolina, and their whole gig is to find conducive areas like you're talking about that are cost prohibitive, not
competitive. They want an advantage, or they're looking for a place to operate competitively.
And you better believe when IFC saw those ads in that farming journal that said no water regulations, they sent a guy down there to check it out, and like, wow, this is on the up and up. So let's buy 26 square miles. And how IFC works. They own they own the land. They buy as much land. They do all the dirty pool stuff, force the little guys out, all these things. Just like you're seeing now. 4 years ago, they were pumping water that was, your little farmers, it costs about $30,000 to put a new drill in or drill it deeper. Well, they can't afford that, blah, blah, blah. We're on a fixed income. All right, well, then buy this. It's worth more than what you have now anyway. So they were doing all those things. And they got a lot of backers too, right? A lot of money supporting this, a lot of investors, and that gets really gray. You got to do a lot of digging to figure out IFC, where'd this come from? Where'd this corporation, how is this formed? Who's doing this? It's out of North Carolina. Don't worry about it. So their whole gig is they lease out this land, and they pump water, and they run cattle, and they do all these things. And then when it kind of gets to that brink, where it's like, something might be coming up here, they sell it at a premium because they can show this just exponential growth. Hey, it went from nothing to now we have 8,000 cows, dairy cattle, boom, right here in Arizona, no water regulations. So then they sell these farms, and this is what you're seeing. A few years ago, they sold all these farms to these Saudi Arabians who are like, we need alfalfa. We need this stuff for our dairy farms. And it was a win-win for them because not only could they secure alfalfa, it was cheaper for them to just own the alfalfa ground, period. You get to take over so many different things there. So now, and it would have been a good gig if IFC would have just kept running it, I truly believe it, because they were just doing the typical dirty pool stuff, forcing the little guy out, not raising too big of a stink. The second they sold these farms, and now a Saudi Arabia guy, executive halfway around the world, is just poking the bear, and, oh yeah, you're in a drought? Well, we're going to up our irrigation. That's what raised all the questions. And then Governor Hobbs got on her high horse, like, this is an outrage, and all this stuff. And
so are you saying that maybe like the Saudis aren't so much of the bad guys that this is being made out to be?
Exactly. I think they're just a symptom of the situation.
Yeah.
And I always go back to sports analogies.
Sure.
And like, okay, let's do the destruction of the Big Eight. Everyone likes to get mad at Texas, big old bad Texas, right? And I always credit them. You beat Nebraska when we're good. You beat us when we're bad. Now go F yourself. So, but in how that was all formed, in every vote that went up to bring on those 4 schools, even slide Baylor in at the end there. What the hell is Baylor? They
have kind of made a name for themselves, but before that, who were they?
Exactly.
Division II.
Yeah. So every vote within the original charter members of the Big Eight went 7-1, 7-4, Nebraska against, bringing them on. All the big ones that mattered, right? And in all that thing that happened, Texas was the most honest. They said, we're coming in to dominate, and if we destroy your conference, so be it. We just did to the Southwest Conference. We don't care. Like, we're here to win. We're here to dominate and make the most money. We don't care if we destroyed Nebraska, Iowa State, is it Cyclones? Whatever you are, we are Texas. So we're going to have our own channel. We're not going to revenue share, and we're going to take the biggest piece of the pie, too, because we're Texas. So how can you be mad at Texas? They said what they were going to do, and they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Osborne said, I just actually watched their, I forget what the, Day by Day. It's kind of out recently, and Tom Osborne quoted ahead of the Miami game. You don't think of him as an arrogant person, but if you listen to this statement closely, he told the media, he said, they were asking him about Miami, and he said, I think it's the best team that's available to play us. Basically meaning, if you read into that, there's nobody that's going to play with us this year. And this was after a loss to Florida State the year before, and Nebraska was just out for blood that next year. And so then the rest was history. But I was going to even bring that a little more local. The North Carolina firm, or kind of the entity, buys an undervalued property. Particularly, they rebuild it or put irrigation on it and grow it, and then potentially overvalue it and sell it to a foreign entity.
Right. Yep.
So that's not an uncommon model in business, I wouldn't say. I've also been, like, back in Boyd County when I was actively farming full time. There's the organization, the NRD, is the Niobrara Valley, or the water district, natural
resource district.
Yeah. And they're locally governed, and you would have different regulation come out of that every 3 or 4 years. It felt political, though. It wasn't really based on geology or hydrology. Sometimes it was because somebody on the board was a neighbor to somebody that the board didn't like, or there were these things that went on that I didn't even like to hear about them, let alone. And we were trying to get some water right. We were trying to figure out how to get irrigated in Boyd County. And so once you learn some of that process, it did become... It just became a little muddy, and I didn't appreciate it. But I think that's what you got going, just internationally going on here, is it's taken these local things. And the moral of that story was one of the board members of our local place up there said that they monitor water rights. I did an intern for the NRD for my sophomore year in college up there, and part of my job was to go out and read test wells.
Everyone's favorite guy. I'm here to read your meter.
Yeah, I did it for minimum wage, $5.15 an hour. I got paid, but I wanted the experience. And so I went out and I met with all these irrigators, and so I met with them and did their certifications. But they had monitoring wells around the whole area, and I forget the exact number. I want to say 73 feet was the average, and from the 1955 till, let's call that 2002. I don't even know, close to that. the water level had increased. So through all of the irrigation years, the water level of the area had actually increased. And nobody would talk about that. They were basically putting on more compliance, more regulation, harder to become having a pivot.
Yep.
The reason is corn and bean prices were good, and the public perception was farmers were getting rich. We're going to regulate them.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm really careful with these issues because there's so many layers and then you're talking other countries. There's just a lot of layers there. But then when you bring in a huge city like Tucson or Phoenix, that's people's lives. Yeah. That's not livestock. That becomes a little bit more important in my mind.
Yeah.
This particular article here that this was just written a couple of months ago, they were talking about Phoenix and the county that Phoenix is in. What county is that?
I don't know Phoenix's county, but La Paz is the one that's making all these headlines.
Okay. Well, either way, Phoenix... it says that county uses 2.2 billion gallons of water a day. And to put that in perspective, that's more than twice as much as New York City, despite having half as many people.
Well, yeah, you're in the middle of a desert. Like, what are we talking about here? It's
like the pools, you got the lawns.
So they reference all that. They reference all those things, exactly. And so then you have to go back and you have to ask yourself, like, who really is the bad guy here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you also, and we've talked about this on other podcast episodes where we talk about like foods and what's available to you and, you know, growing your own things and dealing with your own region and working within your means. It seems like every time we as a people try to force something like that, like go out to a desert and build a massive city and have all of this cool shit.
Yeah.
What do you know? It doesn't work. We start having major problems.
God, we can't have a 24/7, 365 alfalfa field in the middle of a desert?
It seems to me like so common sense. I mean, that's what we are. This is Common Folk Podcast. It's like so common sense. What are you guys doing? But it's really all in the name of money, right? I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in doing that.
Right. So, you're talking about these layers and how there's always a little bit more to it, right? So we talked about the model for IFC out of North Carolina. They would lease out a farm for a number of years, and then when it got to that brink, sell it. So here's an example. One of them, I think, was called Riverview Farm.
Out of Minnesota?
Yep.
Yeah,
yes, there you go. Yeah.
Client.
They're
ex-client. I mean, I'm not active anymore. I got to be a little careful with that.
Right,
but,
Riverview's a big one down there.
Especially now that I'm in financials. That becomes a lot bigger deal.
Yeah,
they are multi-site, huge corporation, very, in my perspective, a very innovative, good farm. Yeah. Now, I'll let you finish and poke holes in that, but I've had nothing but success stories with them and people's lives that they've changed for the better.
So this is the success, right? IFC leases out to Riverview. Riverview, out of nothing, it used to be a desert. They start a farm in unregulated water, La Paz County, and they build this thing up to 8,000 dairy cows. Like, it takes quite a bit to run 8,000.
They're coming to get the fall. When Saudi leaves, they're going to have the cows there to feed on the same alfalfa ground.
So here, we'll get to that, but this is where we're at now. They sold out to the Saudis. IFC says, all right, lease is over. We're selling now. And Riverview's like, well, we're not buying for what you think you're going to sell it for. Saudi's like, we need it. We just need it. And now we get control too. So they actually backed it off. There's only 6,000 dairy cows down there now, but there's 165,000
in Saudi Arabia.
165 slaughter cattle on feedlots on the same ground.
Gotcha.
So it went from 8,000 cows to 73,000 cows
173
in like 2 years. In 2 years' time, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, they're just over there and they don't care. They're
sounds
within
like
the rules.
Cheap feed. Bring the cows to the feed, and Riverview's doing that, and Saudi's trying to figure out what to do.
yeah. So they're in the middle of that right now.
Interesting.
And that's where they're taking too much advantage of it. If they could just play ball, have a little grasp of what the locals are saying and what they can get away with, like Riverview did. Riverview did a great job. 8,000 dairy cows probably don't belong in the middle of a desert, and to be a thriving farm, probably shouldn't be there.
Well, but the issue Riverview runs into is they don't look good next to Minneapolis either. And so Minnesota, as you guys would know, they're very congested farming community, very similar to right across the border here into Iowa, and just the population stifles what you can do as far as growing. And so they're an example of somebody that's going to look for a competitive advantage around the country. And once they can figure out, because they're in our area, I don't know if you knew that, but they're heavily in Boyd County and not so much Boyd County, but the surrounding counties. There's 3 or 4 operations. And so from my perspective with my past, I actually look at those companies as somewhat of the innovative future. And again, I'm not as popular in some farm circles because I do think that
he's the meter guy.
Yeah, I just check your water meter usually. That's my role. But I believe there's so much wealth coming down the pipeline in terms of the baby boomers leaving the rural communities. They're going to leave real estate behind some way, shape, or form. And who's going to manage it?
Riverview out of Minneapolis.
I think you're.
I don't think it's actually Minneapolis.
Well, Minnesota.
I mean, what type of company can do that?
You've got a great point. That's something that I hadn't really thought a lot about. I've known over the last, it would be like the last 10 years here, working closely with farmers, but living here my whole life, that young guys can't get into this game, and there's
generational wealth is too deep.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't compete. I always tell young folks to look for partnering opportunities,
right.
Look to work into, and essentially that's how I got in. I worked into a commercial alfalfa program, and that was my way into production agriculture.
Yep. And that's what I was going to touch on next. What we continue to see over and over is the boomers retiring. They don't have any kids, or if they do have kids, the kids aren't interested at all. They've moved away. You do have that young farmhand that's working for them, that's hoping, he or she is working their way up and is going to be able to get some kind of deal or something. It doesn't normally work that way. And I've thought to myself, like, man, what is going to happen to all these farms? And I never really put that second piece together, what you're talking about there, where, these big conglomerates or foreign companies, they've got the money, they'll come in and buy it. And that's what we're going to be seeing more and more of, I think. And is that what you're saying? I
think so, yeah. And you brought something up earlier about at one point there was a big inflationary market back in 2011, 10. It kind of was, in hindsight, it was 2008 to about 2014, but ag products were really getting inflated. Corn, beans, energy was high, fuel was going up. And I had a sit down with a couple really big clients, and we were discussing what to do with hay. And I was scared to give them a price because I knew the market just kept going up and up and up. And I basically let them come up with a number, and the number then was $300 a ton. And after we made the deal, I said, "How are you guys doing this?" And he goes, "Kyle, we have 150,000 mouths to feed every morning and every night. We don't have a choice right now. We have to have the feed."
They got to procure the
feed.
They
had to do that, and they're big land holdings too, so they got a lot of different things going. But at that time, as a small thinker, small farmer, I didn't realize that that's how these markets get created. Somebody's got to find the top somebody, in an inflationary market. And they were smart enough to know that we got these guys are carrying around 12,000 tons a year. We got to figure out where it's going.
Yeah.
And at what price. They didn't need to do all of our business, but they needed to do something to find out where the market's going. That's why I didn't want to give a number. And so we ended up settling at a good number for us. I think in hindsight, a good number from them, and it's still a valid number today.
You don't want to be the doof and say 150, and then they look at you like, "Oh my God, we would pay double that easy." Yeah. Our opening offer was double that.
Oh, I've been that guy way more than I care to admit. Don't worry about that.
I think anybody in this business has in one way or another.
Yeah. So
it's how you learn,
right?
So backtracking, getting back into all those different layers with this story. When La Paz opened it up in 1982. Shortly thereafter, the city of Phoenix bought 20 square miles in La Paz County and leased it out for farming. And the thought was, well, we need to have water, and this could just be our easy little pipeline to the aquifer. Like, we'll run out of ours, but we don't need to worry about that. We can get as much as we need from La Paz County, just 90 miles down the road. Then fast forward to 2008, when IFC started doing all this leasing, the city of Phoenix just sold that 20 square miles back to IFC. Okay, you needed water back in the 80s, but you don't need water now.
And every news channel's carrying your water shortage every night.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, that doesn't make sense, does it?
No, that doesn't make sense,
Right.
does it? What's going on?
It only makes sense
boy.
if what you're selling
So
is worth a whole lot more than what you could use it for, right?
Yep. So, okay, how did this come to be? What's going on here? So who's funding IFC? And this little independent, stupid journalist that I looked up, he figured it out, the aha moment, and $175 million of Arizona's retirement fund out of their retirement system invested into IFC. So your pension is paying for you to be bought out. So all your government officials, all your school teachers got you by the balls now too. Hey, do you not want your pension?
And they probably were having trouble with funding of the pension, and they're like, hey, here we go.
Here we go. We got all this water rights, and once, and then if you want to put on your tinfoil hat, and I love to do that, it's kind of fun talking about conspiracies, especially when they're not conspiracies, when it's just all out in the front of you here. You can look at it like they always knew that they were playing chess. Like, we're going to be able to get this back because it's going to go to the Saudis. They're going to muddle it up, and there's actually a clause in the sell. We get first right to buy it back.
Yeah.
If it goes sideways.
It isn't totally uncommon.
Of course it's not uncommon, but just think of that. Okay, we know it's going to go sideways because you guys are going to F it up, and then we're going to end back up with it. We're going to sell it, make that money, then we're going to get back for pennies on the dollar. Yeah.
Or the governor's going to come in and make it worth nothing.
Yeah.
Or whoever it was, the mayor, or whoever were you talking about,
Hobbs.
whoever the lady was.
Well, and the attorney general, this new gal too, Chris Mays is her name. She was working hand in hand with Hobbs, and she's the one that was like, her whole platform was, we need to get these Saudi Arabians out of here. This is unbelievable. That it's like,
that's kind of your political narrative
sure,
from
yeah.
everybody I've talked to on this. Any type of issue like this one is.
Yeah.
That's where I'm always skeptical. I'm like, wait a minute, there's
Right.
more to this.
So let's touch on that real quick, where we talk about like this foreign ownership, because I think that's part of this, and there's a lot of what people are talking about right now.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
all these companies coming in and buying up all this farmland. It's going crazy, right? But everything that I've seen and that I continue to look up, that doesn't quite seem to be the case. It's just a bunch of like people using that
corporations.
for some kind of political motivation, wherever the case may be, to make them look good or whatever. Like what this lady did to prevent the Saudis from using water, in the grand scheme of things, really,
It's peanuts compared to their
Yeah.
entire farm.
Yeah.
Like you pointed out,
Yeah.
it's just
It's just too.
it's
They
an
just
indicator of what could be, but is the story blown out of proportion a little bit too? It's
they've
hard
only
to say.
denied them 2 new leases. They still have all the other leases that they've had.
Right.
They got 8 within the last year. I think 8 new pumps drilled. So like, oh, you can't do these next 2. It's just the first domino to fall in what I believe they're going to be able to get this land back.
So when you look at some of these foreign investors, it was just something that I looked up quick online, and there was a number of websites that said the exact same thing. A couple of numbers: 1.3 billion acres of privately owned ag land in the U.S. Of those 1.3, foreign entities fully or partially own 40 million. So it's 1.3 billion. They own 40 million.
3 to 5%.
Exactly. Yeah,
I was
they're
going to say
saying
3% is
Yeah.
kind of my research.
So, like, while that's something that we definitely need to be smart about and keep our eyes on, I mean, are we really getting this jacked up over 3%?
Well, and that's what I was saying. Like, this was when I first dove into this. This isn't a new story, and there's been some really good ones that came out 4 or 5 years ago on this very topic. But since it was a corporation out of North Carolina, it wasn't that big of a deal. We didn't really put that much into it. But now, man, that really grinds my gears that these Saudi Arabians are over here, and they're 3%.
And they list what do they got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Top 10 foreign ownerships. Number 1's Canada. Saudi Arabia isn't even on this list. Ireland is number 10, and they've got 760,000 acres.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it's woods too, or forests.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Canada is mostly forest ground, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, it just seems like, I mean, again, there's definitely problems.
Right.
And we got to figure those things out. But I feel like there's a lot bigger problems that we are doing ourselves. And when I say we, I mean like, some of our leaders, some of the people who are in charge of things, that they need to be held accountable. We want this big news story of we're going to hold the Saudis accountable. Okay, great. But what about all the BS that we're doing?
Yeah. And I kind of wonder, so I took a look back at all the different governors, who gets credit, who gets blamed. Obama did this. Well, yeah, but then Trump did that and made it worse. Well, I wouldn't have done that if it wouldn't have been for Clinton's, right? You know how that goes.
The unintended consequences.
Well, and it's here and now, right? I got to get my votes now, and I'll blame it on the previous guy. In Arizona, it really does go back and forth between Republican governor, Democratic governor. So
they're always a swing state.
Yeah. So from
midterms and regular.
Yeah. So from 1973 up until now, it's really gone back and forth. I couldn't really pin it on, okay, he's the one that passed the legislation that allowed for this unregulated. No, it was her. It really went back and forth. I couldn't just pin it on one party, which I think that's been the case kind of all along. They work together, the donkeys and the elephants, or whatever the mascots
be. The swamp.
Drain the swamp.
And to give a little bit of perspective on the trend, roughly 10 years ago it was 2%, and now it's a little over 3%. So in 10 years it's gone up 1% foreign ownership.
Probably kind of significant in terms of that. I mean, you always look at the direction of things and what's coming, but I think in a world of globalization, there's probably a healthy amount of that could go on. I'm not going to take a side here today.
No,
I think
we're demanding. This is common folk.
Conceivable.
Well, and we touched on earlier. I mean, I don't have the numbers pulled up. I'm sure we could find them with a little research of how much foreign land U.S. companies or U.S. government owns.
Oh yeah, especially in
probably a lot
in third world countries, especially. We'll take advantage of that all day long.
Yeah, And I don't want anybody to think that I'm for foreign companies owning U.S. farm ground. I'm not for it, but I'm trying to bring a little bit of perspective. Understand it's not quite as bad as we're being led to believe it is, but that doesn't mean we still don't need to do something about it.
Or that I'm a pro-U.S. empire, take over that third world country.
Right.
It's just the reality of the beast.
Yeah, right. And I do think state governments are. I was just, like I said, I was looking through our old American Farm Bureau committee. We have a kind of a dialogue over these hot topics every so often, and it appears that a lot of your states are putting some policy around this to help regulate it, and maybe not necessarily not let it happen, but they're making it a topic, which I think is good.
Yeah, of course it is.
There's the last thing I'll finish with on this land, and you guys can talk about anything else that you want to add to it. But are you familiar with that company that came around, and they still kind of exist, but they were big for a little while, making a big push, called Tillable?
I am aware of Tillable. Don't know much about them.
Okay, I don't know a whole lot about them, but here's what I do know, and it's because of some of the farm families that I've worked directly with. So we talk about, people are worried about these foreign companies coming in, driving up land prices, land values, taking land from the local guy, pushing people out, all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So this company comes along. I don't know if they're U.S. based, but at least I know everybody that's working for them is in the U.S., so they're pushing it. They make an effort to go in and get all the ownership of all the land in XYZ area and figure out what is being leased and what isn't. So it's like someone owns it, but they're not farming it. They're renting it to another farmer, cash rent, whatever. And they go ahead and start directly contacting all of these property owners and making big offers. So effectively starting to push all these people out. What they end up finding out is that they didn't realize on the ground level, a lot of these people, as an example, like the guy who owns it but doesn't farm it, leases it to his son. So they call, and they're trying to buy it from dad out of underneath the son. And then they're also calling son because he owns some over here, and they started stepping all over themselves.
Oh,
but the point is that you took this U.S. company in here doing every bit as bad as someone like the Saudis coming in and buying up some land and using water. And it's all internal. And we're causing all this trouble for ourselves. Americans are causing all this trouble for other Americans, pushing out farmers, running people off their ground, driving prices, all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, we don't do a whole lot of talking about that.
No.
Well, I was actually, it's interesting that I was at a meeting probably a month ago, and the presenter was talking about how evil John Deere in this context, and I'm playing neutral on that, but this was how the presentation was using your data, your farm data from their telematics,
Starlink or whatever.
Operations stuff, and they were using your data to feed into their larger database that then they would ultimately sell down to maybe tillable, to these other companies, and they would have data on your ground. And all these, I was definitely the youngest one in this room, all these older folks, I mean, he was scaring the heck out of them.
Sure.
And I'm sitting here thinking, and he was trying to tell them, well, they want this data because they want to be able to figure out kind of strategically what land values should be versus what one neighbor offers it and another neighbor may pay for it. And he had them so scared, and I'm like, really? Because we've been collecting data on ground since, for sure, before the 1930s to establish a value. And I'm like, this stuff isn't scary if you've got the right people looking at it and execute it. Now, if there's ill intent, I think it should be it should come to the surface. But to some extent, the way these things, and then the other issue from the IRS perspective, a lot of this land can't sell without huge tax implications, because if Grandpa got the farm for $100 an acre cost basis and now it's worth $10,000 an acre, he can't sell that without a $9,000 capital gains. And so a lot of times you'll have these entities, call it tillable, whoever, that are trying to push change and push transition, and the tax people are telling them, you can't do this. And so once in a while, they'll hang a son or daughter on it, and they'll say, I'm going to deed this to you. And let's say that son or daughter doesn't want a farm and they want to sell out. Okay, Dad, I'll take the farm, but I'm selling it the second you look away. Of course, they don't always know that until it happens.
Sure.
The son or daughter has to sell a piece of ground. The proceeds from the sale of a piece of ground have to pay the capital gains, even if they want to keep some real estate. It's such a big tax issue, and so that's going to keep some of those tillables a little bit away from changing the industry too fast.
And what a lot of those guys were doing, so maybe to give a little bit of clarification on it, is they were coming in and they weren't buying the ground. So they were going to the owner and they were saying, basically, we kind of want to be your broker. We can get you, so you're getting $200. What are you getting right now? $200 an acre. We'll get you $350. So then that farmer or that owner goes to the guy who's farming it and says, hey, this guy just called me and offered another $150 an acre.
Or it might even be the son in some cases.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so it's things like that.
Then you got an upset son.
Right. And then when you talk about companies like John Deere, and that we could do a whole nother episode on that, but the data that those guys are collecting is unbelievable. And when you talk about ground and values and things like that, I mean, imagine if you could take some of this data that the farmer didn't realize he was giving you, that will show exactly how many acres are farmable, because the equipment GPS maps it, so they know exactly how much is getting farmable. They know exactly the average yields they're getting off of it. They know exactly the inputs that are happening, that they're having to put in it. So they can put all these costs together, and now all of a sudden they've got like this really
comprehensive
information about this acre.
I will speak to that a little bit, because that's the perception in the industry. That I actually took a precision ag class just as an adult lately for the purpose of understanding, because I went in, I actually rotated from commercial alfalfa where we didn't have all those technologies per se. We had some, but not near like row crop. And as my family grew and time constraints, I wanted to get into something a little less stressful. I mentioned the PTSD earlier. So row crop had a safer route to go. And so instantly I became really interested in the telematics and the John Deere operations, and I loved it. Took a class on it. But I spent a lot of time, more than the common farm manager, on figuring out how to link all that stuff and how to get good data. It's really hard to come up with good data. There's going to be farms that do it. That will be the future, but we're a long ways from that. Because I mentioned my network, I run it. I'm like, how are you guys getting good data yet? Are you are you getting good yield data? Are you getting good overlay with chemical fertilizer? All these things, and nobody could give me a straight up, yeah, it's going really good, I got it dialed in. Nobody. And so that makes me, I know that's the perception, but I don't think we're there as a reality.
Sure. Yep, I can see that.
It reminds me of a story back in the Agzyme days where I was, and I got to see it from another angle too, because I sold advertising to a big John Deere implement. So I'd buddy up with those guys. And I'm like, oh, this co-op over here, they're running your guys' high boys, your sprayers. And he goes, oh, yeah, that's so-and-so. He needs to slow it down. That guy drives it. I'm like, whoa, you keep such a good eye on him. You know that he drives a little too fast. Like being a simpleton as I am, I found that kind of like a little shocking. Like not only does he know how much they spray, how many hours, like I get that. But he knows that this guy's been driving that high boy a little too fast for my liking. So it's pretty wild.
I'm a data nut. I love ag data specifically. And on our commercial hay side, we could actually tell. So we had a productive hour cost per piece of equipment. And I could tell, and everybody would run around a 85 to 93% efficiency. And I'll explain that a little bit. But let's say you're paying, just as an example, you're paying somebody $20 an hour. The equipment cost hour might be 23, 24, 22. And so to speak to your point, we had an older guy that the whole community loved and felt like he was such a good operator. And I was sitting here looking at the data being $35, $40 an equipment hour. And he was really good at keeping track of things. So I knew what was going on. He wasn't driving fast enough, what the equipment capacity should be. And so the data will give you a lot of fragmented good. I mean, it'll give you some management tips, but it's still not there. Now, this co-op manager that you're speaking of, he may have been able to look at average miles per hour through the field and see that guy's off the charts or whatever.
And he didn't deny it. I went and talked to the other guy, the actual operator from this co-op, and he's like, oh, yeah, I cranked that son of a bitch up.
Reminds me.
And there's certain equipment that you have to go fast, like a windrower. If you have a razor cutter, and you're going, I would get mad at people for going too slow because you're costing me money and you're costing you a job.
Oh, the co-op loved the guy. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the John Deere dealer, like, man, that's on a 4-year lease and you're beating the hell out of it. You're really putting that high boy at it. It's going to be wore out when we get it back.
That story you were telling about that old boy that was working for you, that makes me think of that movie Moneyball. Like you have all this perspective of like, this guy's good, this guy's good, this guy's got the best story, all these people like this guy, But then when you sit down and really look at the numbers, you're like, actually, this one that no one really likes is the performer. Let's get him in there. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we're looking at on-base percentage here as the main determining factor into winning games. And this guy that everybody loves doesn't get on base.
Right. Yeah. He's fun to hang out with, but boy, his production is not doing very well.
No, we need to, at some point, we'll talk a little bit more afterwards about some of the stuff that you're into with like the data and the analytics and stuff. Because I
had one more comment just to leave on that note because I didn't want to forget it. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, the story goes that they shut down 40,000 John Deere tractors. I can't personally validate that, but the same presenter was talking about that. And so through their system of data analytics, they were able to actually shut down another country's machines. Yeah. Again, a little bit of a scare tactic. I'd have to learn more, but that does
tractors
kind of make you think.
It does, yeah. And what I can validate for you on that particular topic is that I work with a lot of farmers on equipment in particular, heavy equipment, big row crop stuff. And the manufacturers absolutely have a direct connect to that machine through a modem. It's very rudimentary. It's like your SIM card in your phone, that gives the connection to this thing, and they can control everything from that. I had a customer of my own. They send updates over the air to these machines now.
Yeah.
Vehicles today get it as well. I had a customer who had this update, and you can ignore it, and you can keep operating. but you can only ignore it so long. And he got a phone call from his dealership and said, I know you're ignoring that update. You've got about 60 more operating hours, and then that machine is going to park where it's sitting until you accept that update.
Mm-hmm. And by the update, by the way, the update will be $10.99 more on the subscription. That's how I always felt. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. So they literally were going to shut his machine down. So the point is that yes, they 100% can do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and I mean, OnStar's been doing it with GM vehicles for how long now? 20-something years. Like there's always the advertisement of, oh, your car gets stolen. Call the cops. If they can get on the phone with OnStar will tell them where it is. Then the cop will pull up behind it and say, "Hey, OnStar, shut it down," and they do. And then they get your car back.
It's for your safety. It's for your benefit, and that's where I think like this to tie it back into our story here with the land. Now that we got Saudis involved, and they shouldn't be doing that, and they're abusing the land, like we've been doing for a long time. Right. Now the local governments, the state and federal governments, now they're going to get to put in their water regulations that they want. La Paz County that didn't have any regulations, now you are, and you're asking for it. Like, I really think that's you want to go next level. I think that's what's happening. And it's a political ploy. Listen to a really good podcast on this from Reveal. Some pretty hotshot journalists, they love to do the I gotcha deal. And they had the gal I was talking about, the Attorney General, Chris Mays, and she ran her platform. This is an outrage of Saudi Arabians, and then we're sending it over to them. Mm-hmm. That was her. That was like one of her big stances, what got her elected. And so he's doing the investigating, and he's meeting with her, and he goes, "So do you know where IFC got this money from? You know where they got this money so they could?" She goes, "No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me." And so he told her.
Your constituents.
Well, from your pension fund. Right.
Yeah.
From the Arizona State Pension Fund.
How are they going to feel when they find out that you know that information?
Right.
So I wrote down the question word for word. Do you believe it's a conflict of interest when the state officials that are supposed to be managing the water usage also have a financial benefit from allowing the Saudis to use it? And here's her answer. Yeah, no, I'm just going to not comment on that. And then she went blah, 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 blah. I'm like, you liar. She knows.
At the beginning of this, I think, Kyle, you said something along the lines of, like, any of these kinds of stories, like, you're kind of apprehensive to really comment on it. You feel like there's a whole lot more to learn about it first. Like, there's a lot more going on. And I think that's very smart. You just touched on it right there.
Boom.
I mean, all we see is the headlines and the quick snippets. Yep. And, the governor or whoever she is saving Arizona and kicking the Saudis out.
Get them out of here. Get us regulation, please.
But wait, there's more. Mm-hmm. And then we start seeing all these other things.
We put this wheel in motion, and then it's going to come back around. We're going to benefit twofold. We're going to finally get to regulate this stupid county that we've been playing like a pawn the whole time. Yeah. Like, it sounds really crude. But that's how I'm measuring this one up.
It's wild. Mm-hmm. So I guess to kind of get to the end of all this, Kyle, what are you involved in today? What are you spending most of your time doing?
So I do ag estate planning. I'm a comprehensive financial planner in Oakland, Nebraska. A job with my family and kind of my farm brought me to Oakland, but a year into that, I could tell it just wasn't going to be what I'm passionate about. And towards the end of that stint, I actually spent a little time visiting with the president of Nebraska Farm Bureau and the CFO there on how we can get farm families to have a comprehensive approach from management transition, estate planning, tax planning. You mentioned pensions. How do you bring in an investment package into farming to where a son or daughter can build a retirement account without it based on land that might sell to Saudi Arabia, for example? But basically kind of a comprehensive approach. And I got that opportunity of a childhood friend of mine. Andy might know him, Eric Luber in Norfolk, Nebraska with Foundation Wealth Advisors. He played baseball with me when I was younger before I played baseball with you. So that's our connection. His grandpa had has a ranch back there, has since passed away. But basically in Oakland, my family didn't want to move out of the area, and I was in finance and studying for my MBA, and I just reached out to them and actually for a cubicle to just kind of figure out what I was going to do with life at that point. And he actually he said, we've got a retiring financial advisor there, and if you'd be interested. And so within a week, I tagged onto them, and I run their satellite branch of Foundation Wealth Advisors in Oakland, and then farm passively. We have about 1,000 acres back home in Boyd County that we, like I said, I passively operate. I've got a couple staff members that are very, very good. They've been with me for a long time and kind of lived through some of those big ag years that we got fortunate to be part of. And fortunately for me, that's those experiences I draw on to help my current clientele. And so that's kind of what we're doing today.
Awesome. Is there any benefit for you in terms of what you have going on to let folks listening to this know how to contact you? Does that make sense? Are you guys looking for any?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Oakland, Nebraska. I'm on Facebook, Kyle Lechtenberg, Foundation Wealth Advisors, LinkedIn. I mean, I'm kind of on all your normal venues. And I'm excited for you guys. I was telling Andy, we did a podcast with a friend of mine from Michigan for almost a year. It was called The Kitchen Table, and just through some life events, we kind of let it fade away. But I do have a strong passion for telling rural folks, rural families, and rural ag specifically, telling their story and being part of it, and really helping that demographic of our country. So that's what my passion is, and that's why I'm in the role I am now. And forums like what you guys are doing, I think, are helpful for that. So.
Well, we've got a lot of rural folks that listen to this, and I'm sure there's some that could get some benefit from talking to folks like you. I mean, there always are.
Oh yeah.
And I'll be honest. People who have listened to our podcast for a while know, for me personally, I hate money. I'll flat out tell you, I hate it.
That was one of our.
It might have been the name of one of them.
It was the title of one of them.
I dread thinking about it, dealing with it, working with it, in anything that it has to do in my life, other than just getting the job done for me.
And that's what it is. I mean, people don't realize it's a currency. All its job is to be an intermediary between the services and goods that we provide each other.
For sure. Yep.
And so our role as a company is just to help people feel secure in how they handle it, and how they manage it, and what they invest in. And so you're not alone on that, by the way.
And what I was getting at is, in speaking with you today, it's been a great conversation. I've definitely appreciated it. I think for anybody who feels the way that I do, I think would be comfortable speaking with someone like you with your approach. So it's great. I appreciate that.
Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate being here.
Yeah. So parting gifts, we like to get folks some stuff. You get a Common Folk t-shirt. We'll ship you out a couple of things from the podcast. And for folks listening, we're still giving away merch. If you'd get on and do a review, right? Get on the Apple, get on the Spotify,
and get on YouTube too. That would really help us. And sooner than later, YouTube's going to be all in on podcasts. They're going to do it. Google owns YouTube. The two largest search engines on the planet are owned by the same company. But anyway, Google Podcasts are going away, and it's going to get transitioned into YouTube. We're already on it. We're already doing the thing. And it's a really cool way to interact. You can just straight up burn us or give us a thumbs up, whatever you want to do. I actually like to hear all of it. On the sports betting side, I love it when they throw a shade. I'm like, that's right.
Then you know. Then you know. You gotta adapt or throw that guy away. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, right? For sure. So definitely check that out. Andy's been working hard on the YouTube side of things. If you leave us a review, let us know. Shoot me a message, Ben at farmfocused.com. Let me know that you left it. I'll shoot you a t-shirt. I'll shoot you a hat, whatever works. We just need to continue to grow those to keep doing what we're doing. So
exactly right.
Appreciate everybody listening. You guys got anything else?
We covered a lot there.
Yeah, we did. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I guess we'll close it down, huh?
Later.
All right. See ya.
Thanks.